Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Mark Butterworth, and I welcome you to the Practice of Risk Management Module 2 of the International Diploma, the mid-program webinar. I hope you can hear me. Some of you may already have been hearing me because the sound was on a little earlier, I think. So there you go, you've seen some of the background to what happens here. Okay, I can still see some new people, attendees, sort of cranking up a little bit. So what I'll do, I'll go straight on to the introductions. But some of you who joined the introductory webinar would have seen some of these, but not everybody did. So some people haven't seen this. A bit of my own background, really, that I've had a long career in the insurance world largely, but also in construction and property ownership and investment. And then some years ago, focused much more on risk management. Did the IRM exams. I'm a fellow of the Institute through the examination route. And now I run a company called Condi, and we undertake risk management, corporate governance, board effectiveness reviews, and so on. Past chairman of IRM, and so on. You can see it there, and I suppose it all brings it round now to what I do currently, which is risk management consulting and training and risk management mentoring. Let's move on. What we're going to cover today is a little bit of repetition to ensure that everybody's tuned into the module learning outcomes and the structure of the program. And we'll touch on, as we did in the introductory, just touch on certain features of the course to, give us some sort of flavour of the sorts of things that you may well be familiar with already or will be during your studies. I want to look at, take a brief look at the exam questions and the style that they're in. Now, bear in mind there will be a pre-exam revision webinar. This is not about revising at this stage of the program, but my own view is that when you are studying, as you're going through this journey, you need to know what the end challenge, if you will, is going to be, so that you read and you consider and you digest the information appropriately. The system here does allow you to pose questions, and I think we're generally able to cover most of them, but if you do post anything and I don't have time to cover it, I'll touch on this again later. There is the LinkedIn forum for students, and you can post questions there. And perhaps more interestingly, either other students or myself will see if we can address those questions. Okay, let's go on. Oops, back to the slides. Yeah, in the study guide, which you should be very familiar with now, should be part and parcel of your everyday lives, I think. You will see on page 10, that's not page X, my copy anyway, is page Roman numeral 10, the learning outcomes. And again, in terms of mind management, so to speak, I always feel it's really helpful to understand what you're going to be tested on, where you're going, I suppose, and what the journey is. And without reading every work here, you can see that these learning objectives are reflected in the units that appear throughout the study guide and that you're asked to work through. And here are the unit titles. And again, those of you that were on the original, the welcome webinar would know how I feel this is very important to work methodically through these units, because they are kind of joined up, so that you understand the logic and the relevance as you go through the units. This is the journey that I was talking about. I've already referenced the study guide, which you either download and print or just download and save on your machine, which is about 100 pages, something like that. But most importantly is the access you need to the required and recommended readings. The main text for this course is the Fundamentals of Risk Management book by Paul Hopkin, very nice and past risk manager, very nice chap, past risk manager at the BBC and other places. And his textbook is now in its 5th edition. It's been updated a number of times. It's a pretty comprehensive book. There's a lot in there, and you're referred to the sections you're required to read and understand at different points in the study guide. And then there are things such as the guidance on risk management and internal control and the UK Corporate Governance Code, both published by the Financial Reporting Council, and these other documents. Finding these references for these documents are all contained within the study guide. Probably know that. In the study, as it's called, the online resources for students, you will find, or you may have found already, a study plan template. It's pretty straightforward. It's like any time planner. You know, your objectives, the various stepping stones in this journey, and you know, you can insert when you're going to do things. In the introductory webinar, I gave an example of, you know, taking an average week, Monday through to Sunday, and you may work, for example, 2 hours Monday to Thursday, have a rest on Friday, work on Saturday afternoon, and work on Sunday morning. Whatever it is that kind of suits you, it's really helpful to pre-allocate time rather than just sort of take it on the hoof when, you know, one naturally can allow other priorities to come into your busy lives. So use a template, use a plan or a diary, you name it. You know, you can do exactly as you wish, but I hope that nobody is doing nothing, if you get what I'm saying. So also, I've already mentioned the LinkedIn Student Forum for Module 2, the International Diploma. You can search that out, and you know, if you're LinkedIn already, of course, and then join the group. It's an open, well, it's open to the students. You know, who else would join? And in particular, to sign up for the November 2019 exam group course. And you can post questions there. You'll see some points that people have raised already. So, as I said, sometimes I answer them. Very often other students, you know, answer the point that's been raised, or say, yeah, you know, I've got that problem too, whatever it might be. And to, I suppose, reinforce what I was just saying, I have to ask if you aren't really thoroughly reading the study guide, and all, I should underline that word, all the required readings. It's not just those main ones that were noted on the, well, a couple of slides ago, or previous slide. You really do need to be into, you know, all the other readings and learning what they're about. It's not just a question of breezing over them or speed reading them. You really need to know their content. There's a lot to do. Okay, I said we'd have a look at certain things from the program itself, units 1 to 6, but we're just sort of picking out a few points on certain units. And you know, there's a lot going on in the global business environment, and as risk professionals, you know, it's our job to tune into these things and ask, you know, do they affect us directly or indirectly? Is this could this be regarded as an emerging risk that we haven't really assessed before? And what should we do about it? Is our control environment appropriate? So the one from the Daily Telegraph, thank you to them, the newspaper. This is probably a couple of years old, this quote, but I like it because it you know, you'd recognize the message in any business, but for a period, health authorities were actually being targeted more than other types of organizations, as you know, the bad guys felt that there's such important information that's stored, the ransomware virus attack, you know, would be very profitable. I don't know if it was, but we all know that cyber attacks have to be taken very seriously. More recently, the BBC, of course, have been covering the developments in Hong Kong and the social unrest, if I can call it that. What they're saying here, my little quote, this is from the, you know, not from the main news, this is from the business news, and it's the implications really for companies that might have subsidiaries or suppliers or customers in Hong Kong, and having a very careful look at whether the social unrest, is going to impact your business. So if you've got, comprehensive risk register, then you might or might not have, social unrest in your main locations as one of your risks. So it's an opportunity when you see something in the news to actually go back and look at the risk and ask, is this a risk? Does it sit within our risk profiling and our risk register, etc.? Also, what's been in the news is Hurricane Dorian hitting the Caribbean and southeast United States. But we have these moments here in the UK as well. We all have bad weather, I suppose, all around the world. And I like this particular image here of the east coast of the UK, where pretty well every town and village and port on the east coast had a red warning for incoming floods. You'll also note the amber colours way inland right across the country as a storm force wind and rain was coming. Again, from a commercial point of view, questions, will this affect any of our properties, our people, our business, our organisation, our customers, our stakeholders more widely? And sometimes some pretty awful disasters come along, such as the 2 Boeing 737 MAX 8 crashes, and the Civil Aviation Authority at the time of writing this is probably out of date now. It said they do not currently have sufficient information from the recorder, but as a precautionary measure, issued instructions to stop any commercial passenger flights in the UK. So that affected a lot of airlines, of course it did, and Boeing in particular. It's something that also the aviation industry is a very big pond, and when something splashes in the middle, it ripples out a long way to all sorts of suppliers and users, if you will, of air travel. A kind of what-if scenarios have to be looked at to see how the issue might affect your organization. So this is where I'd like to, for you to think now, and if you have pen and paper ready, you might jot something down, or you might take it on after this webinar, but just on those 3 scenarios. So let me just go back to the scenarios. There we go. The cyber, the civil unrest, the weather, there's 4, okay, and the implications of the travel. What risk management actions do you think you would recommend if you felt that any of those scenarios or other scenarios you can think of could affect your organization? And then looking across the units, where do you think the course will be most relevant? And I'm thinking right now of understanding risk appetite and risk tolerances, and saying, hey, look, do these matters really matter to us? Are they really relevant? You might say, look, we're UK based only, we're not near the coast, we've got very good security systems, we're on top of it, there's nothing new here. Well, good. So you would probably also then look at the corporate governance section of the course to make sure that the status of risks and exposures and risks and controls are appropriately reported to your senior management team, and how you store and use the information. Let's move on. Sometimes the risk issues are very sector specific. Just spoken then about the airline industry, but each industry has a particular risk emphasis. They may or may not have come across or used the expression risk emphasis, but it really is all about what, the kind of headline risks in the sector in which you operate. And just by way of reminder, this sort of overriding risk characteristic could be something like patient care in healthcare, if you like, operations and nursing care and success rates and so on. And then something like brand awareness in the fashion industry. And if you like, good brand awareness will be something that really helps your sales and your long-term future and so on. in some higher end industries, fashion businesses. You know, brand awareness is all about exclusivity, so that can hold up your high prices. You know, and I won't name any brands now, but I'm thinking of luxury goods and clothing, handbags, fountain pens, you name it. Product efficacy in pharmaceuticals, that you know, the appropriate research and development is undertaking, and testing of pharmaceuticals before issues is undertaken, and that any harmful side effects are known and communicated to potential users and the medical profession. So I'd like to ask you, I'd like to ask you, in the questions area, could you tell me your sector and what your particular risk emphasis might be? And I could probably think of something like the banking sector. What is banking? What is it? Is it financial security, or is that brand management as well? Not really sure about that one. Certainly, yes. In construction, yeah, safety is of prime importance to the construction industry. Thank you, Denise. Yeah. Oh, motorsports regulations, Sachin. We don't have that one very much. Sachin, excellent. Charlotte, thank you. Yeah. So where you're working in a regulated industry, such as under the Financial Conduct Authority, or you know, the Singapore Monetary Authority, whatever it might be, in a regulated environment, being compliant is really absolutely key. Yeah, distribution. Thank you, Natty, Helen, and Caroline. Financial services again. Government reputation, Craig. Yeah. Well, that's good. That's grounds for a long story, and I think Paula is echoing that. Celestino, railways. I'm guessing that's safety again. Central government from Vicky. Yeah. I mean, there's some great points here. Insurance brokerage. Daniel's. I think I'm reading there. I guess that's. Good advice to clients and that sort of thing. I should say, by the way, I can only see a limited number of words on this screen thing that I get. But great. And Yvonne, thank you for bringing it up. The question of the defence and defence industries. Emily, F&B. Not sure I know what that is. F&B. Okay. Maybe you could post that, Emily. Look, and Kieran, NHS, let's move on, but thank you. You're starting to think about, you know, the sector or the industries that you're in and the prevailing risk emphasis. I think it's really important to look across the fence as well into other sectors, because they drive the work that you do on risk management and control management. Food and beverage, thank you, Emily. Food and beverage, well, really important. And Adam, a bank, yeah. Oh no, sorry, Adam. Yeah, no, FNB is also a bank in South Africa. We better move on. Thank you. Yeah, let's go over here. Okay, let's just jump ahead to Unit 3. I've already spoken about appetite and tolerance, but this also includes this, you know, very fluid concept of risk culture. And in your required or advisory readings, there is the Institute of Risk Management's risk culture document, which is a terrific piece of work that was done. And in the image, you can see, maybe you can't read it, but you'll find it in the document itself. What does a good risk culture look like? This is very important to understand the effect of a culture on risk and the application of controls and the way we do things around here. What sort of organization are we? Those sorts of questions are asked. But I'll read this bit, that risk culture is a term describing the values, beliefs, knowledge, and understanding about risk shared by a group of people with a common purpose. So those things, the values, beliefs, and knowledge and understanding, that's where really the risk management function becomes the hub around which the organization rotates and considers the various elements of risk, and you emphasizes the importance of internal communication to ensure that the business is being managed within the appetite and tolerance of the senior management team. You might call it a board of directors or senior management team, council, those sorts of things. And this really is an absolutely essential part of the risk management framework, is for the board to set the risk strategy, which includes the boundaries, I suppose, for accepting risks and going out and seeking risks in the risk appetite. And, you know, a good control environment is important, but you won't be able to, nor would you want to, remove all risks, all levels of risk. So having a tolerance boundary is equally important. Now, I mentioned that risk culture is something of a fluid concept, although metrics are being developed on risk culture. But risk appetite and tolerance is much more developed. I think monitoring metrics will be things such as financial limits on product wastage. It might be a numerical factor in terms of, say, staff turnover. You might be happy with 8 or 10%. And if it goes to 12 or 13%, then it has exceeded your tolerance and something needs to be done. So this is a hugely time-consuming and work-intensive area of work to be absolutely clear in all of your risks in your risk register or framework, whatever you call it, that each one has a kind of boundary to it. Is it material to you? And if so, you know, what sort of actions will you take in order to prevent, you know, the event occurring? One of my favorite scenarios is in the retail industry. Quite straightforward, really. We all go there to supermarkets and the checkout points, and imagine on a Saturday morning a big supermarket with maybe 20 checkouts and all the rest of it. And then suddenly the computer system controlling the checkout points fails. How long would you be okay standing there waiting for the system to come back up? And think about the queue behind you, and you've got to get off somewhere and do something else. You wouldn't wait very long, and that's why the retail industry invests huge amounts of effort into duplicate parallel systems. So if one fails, the other one can be fired up probably in a matter of seconds, and you know, everybody can then sort of carry on, and the firm's income and its reputation is protected. When we talk about the board of directors or the senior management team, of course, what we're thinking of is the group of people that make all of the big decisions. And their role really is to focus on corporate governance. But corporate governance is really very closely blended with risk management. And it's important that we as risk professionals have a really good understanding of corporate governance and corporate governance frameworks. And one of the required readings is the UK Corporate Governance Code. The main principles here are shown within the code: leadership, effectiveness, accountability, remuneration, relationships with shareholders or stakeholders. Let's have a little look at what we mean by stakeholders. Let's think about stakeholders a bit more. And all organizations have quite an array, quite an extensive network, if you will, of stakeholders. And they will often have different perspectives on risk. Going back to this point about working in a regulated environment, the Bank of England and the Prudential Regulatory Authority and the Financial Conduct Authority for banks and insurance companies like to see, generally speaking, low, well-managed risk for those organizations to take. They're a stakeholder. But the shareholders may actually want an insurance company to go out there and take big and exciting risks, because they like to feel that they're the areas where the best returns can be obtained, albeit at the risk that in a really bad year the insurance company may fail. So resolving conflicts of interest, if you will, of stakeholders is this sort of key role of the management team within corporate governance. And so understanding the nature of the risk is absolutely vital for the senior management team. Most senior managers are happy to take well-informed risks, and to avoid unnecessary or ill-informed or under-informed risk-taking, if you will. And that's that approach of having a good awareness of the risks and making executive decisions. It will be expected by all types of stakeholders. Now, I'd like to ask you another question. Just give, well, you don't answer yes or no. Have you listed all your stakeholders? Can you perhaps name? We can start with customers. You can start with suppliers. I've already started one with regulators. What else? Who else is a stakeholder, would you say, in your organization that would have an interest in the level of risk that is being taken? Well, employees, I suppose, yeah. Very, very important. Yusuf, thank you for that. And customers, yeah, of course, Helen. Customers of customers, banks and lenders. Caroline, that's excellent. Yeah, or perhaps I like this expression, the local community. Vicky, thank you very much, because you know, a local community could have all sorts of different perspectives. And you know, if you're producing waste material, pollutants, you know, into the atmosphere or rivers and so on, you've got to be certain you've got very focused on the local communities as the stakeholders, their interests. James, thank you. The group board, house builders, Vicky again, local authorities, Sally, clients and stuff. You've got a whole list there, Charlotte. Thank you for that. And landowners, oh, good one, Vicky. Local community again from Natalie, and authorities, subcontractors. This is starting to get interesting, where you know, so you have contractors, subcontractors, and suppliers to the construction industry of raw materials and so on. Exam boards, yes, of course, you know, the whole education is an industry. Poppy, thank you. That's, and candidates, really important. Parent companies, session. Do you know, I'm struggling now to read all of these. There's some great ones here. I'm going to write all these down. Insurance underwriters, Chris, yeah, excellent. Yeah, great. Thank you, everybody. Victoria, I can't quite read all of your comment there, but working for a consultancy, there must be lots of interested parties there. Yes, and auditors. Let's round off that particular point we're thinking about. Auditors, risk managers' best friends. They are. Let's move on. A couple of slides now, and I think it's a couple of slides on the couple of features, I suppose, from this project management. And some people say, well, that's all taken care of by project management professionals, and largely it is. You might have a PMO, a project management office. But I think it's really important to understand the risks associated with projects, and to particularly then think about contingency planning, alternative approaches to keep a project on track. And projects can be very big, like a big construction site, as we have in that picture there, or you know, maybe opening a new branch of your chain of shops. Important in its own right, but you know, perhaps something that can be taken care of in 3, 4, or 6 months, rather than the construction projects, you know, over 3 or 4 or 5 years. So the question arises here that why is the statement, the longer the project, the greater the risk? Why is this likely to be true? Well, I would say it's likely to be true. I'm going to answer my own question here. It's likely to be true because the longer time you have from your original going out from your original assumptions of the risk, the greater chance there is of either new risks arising or a change in the status of risk that you assessed at the beginning of the project. So yeah, that's something that I think, well, hang on, I'm jumping about here. Yeah, we must really think about and play our parts with project management colleagues. Supply chain management. Again, this is sort of playing out from the thoughts of stakeholders and the interconnectedness of organizations. And I just give you this example here, which again, this is 2 years ago, this huge building there caught fire. And it was an unusual kind of business in the sense that it was a distribution warehouse and so on. And in Glasgow, the Glasgow Fruit Market. And the newspapers covered at the time the impact of this in the supply, not just of fruit, but other foodstuffs to hotels in the north and across Scotland, hotels and restaurants and so on. And also, this is good to think about, it also affected schools. For a brief period, some schools, I understand, had to close because they couldn't get the food suppliers delivering the lunches. So again, this is all about understanding risks in a broader organizational sense. Okay, well, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to sort of change the subject, but we walk through those parts of the course just to help you think, well, next time I'm going to read, I don't know, say Unit 5, which we haven't covered here, or 1 or whatever, that you really get into it and stop and think, do I understand that? What's the implications? And so on. Now we're going to look at some, talk about past exam paper and some questions to show, really, to illustrate just how well you need to know these things. So students have been provided with past exam papers on the study on the website. I'm sure you've been in there. Make sure again that you're in module 2 and November exams and so on. And they're really helpful. I really used to use these sorts of things a lot when I was taking exams. You've got to be really careful about making sure you understand the number of questions that must be answered. There's quite a range of topics, so broad knowledge of the subject matter must be achieved. And just to illustrate there are 2 slides coming up here. So these are real exam questions from past papers, and just look at the structure here. So part A, where you may have to answer 18 or 20 questions from all 18 questions, are generally pretty short questions. And so here's one: governance is, and here's the quote, briefly explain why this statement is incorrect. Okay, well, you will have memorized, of course, from your studying of corporate governance, that it is the system by which organizations are directed and controlled, or the system by which companies are directed and controlled. So it's slightly different. So you therefore answer that question by quoting the correct definition. Simple. Well, it's simple if you memorize it. Okay, look at question 2. We're now in part B of an exam paper, which is much more wordy. You get this short, you can call it a case study, a short scenario, and it says you must prepare a report. And these 2 questions, A and B, you'll see at the end of the 2 questions, one has 14, one has 11 marks. So clearly, much more work to be done compared to the short questions that you saw in part A. Again, though, if you look at the question and try and answer it in your own mind right now, discuss the main changes you foresee in establishing the context for managing the combined department's future risk. Are you really familiar with that from your reading so far, if you've reached that point? Should you be going back over it and thinking in a slightly different way? Explain how the risk management function may need to modify the way it works. Okay. Again, it requires some narrative, written work to answer those questions. I suppose somewhat like the first question we just looked at in the previous slide, that in some cases, many cases, the exam question is a straight or a simple memory test. And this one is taken from the June 2016 exam paper. Your friend listed the 4 levels of risk management maturity, the ascending order of maturity as follows, correct the errors in your friend's list, brackets, Hopkin. So what's it's telling us? It's one of Paul Hopkins' 4 N's, ways of remembering things. And Paul Hopkin uses a lot of these. You will have seen Pestle, for example, and I can't off the top of my head think of any others, but you will, of course, because you're studying them. Yeah, he uses a lot. And so when you see them, memorize them. Know them just like the back of your hand, really. I think they're easy points to pick up, like the 2 points here, the 1 or 2 or 3 points that are given. So as you go through your studies over the next couple of months, make sure you're absorbing these definitions. You'll revise them nearer the exam, but what I'm talking about here is taking them on straight away at the beginning while you're studying. Yeah, in previous years, using the LinkedIn forum, these are some of the questions that students have raised. I'm not going to dissect them here. I'm just giving you examples, and if you like, how helpful the LinkedIn group is. What's the difference between a risk policy and a risk? I got a few comments. And there's a question, is there a diagram for a balanced scorecard? Now, for me, I thought this was a good example where Paul Hopkin just touches on balanced scorecard in his book. But if you want to know more about it, that's where you do your own student research with with search engines being available, and you put in you're going to find something somewhere. And if you're really interested in that area, yeah, you can go in and look at the various writings, articles, books, etc., that deal with balanced scorecard. Probably wouldn't spend a lot of time on it in the context of your overall, examination journey. But when thinking about something that's mentioned in the course and you're not really sure what it's about and you can't really find the answer, I would say do student research first and or post a question like this. Another question was, are there any disadvantages in using an RMIS, a risk management information system? I think I answered that one myself. I said, yes, there are some, on we went from there. So as I say, this is all about using the facilities available to you. And yeah, we're about halfway through. I don't know the exact date of the exams, so they're in November and we're in September now, so it's about halfway through. You've really got to be diligently and thoroughly following the study guide and carry out all the required readings. And those readings have to be in a way of, not just, if you were reading Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet just as for fun from cover to cover, you'd get the story. Yeah, terrific. If you were an actor, if you were if you were Romeo or if you were Juliet and you're going to be acting in a play, you would be reading it with a view to absolutely absorbing it. And that's the kind of nature of your studying, I believe, as we're going along in the next 2.5 months. You might undertake text revisions or note taking using the self-test questions under exam conditions that are available to you. These all help in this absorption, if you will, of your lines or your information, in the reading material. So that kind of brings us around to the end of our time here. The date of the revision webinar will be found on the IRM website. I've no doubt you'll get a message about it as well, but it's also posted on the LinkedIn group, by the way. The more you can be reminded of it, the better, I'd say. And so with that, everybody, I would like to say thank you so much for coming onto this webinar. I hope it's prompted some thoughts for you. It's easy for me, isn't it, sitting here to say to you lot, keep going, keep working hard, and then you'll be successful. But I do say that, and I really mean it. That's how people come through exams generally, and the Institute of Risk Management's international program. So thank you very much. We're going to end the webinar there. Goodbye.